Today, Commissioner, without further ado, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Before turning to today's decision, I would very much like to use this opportunity to congratulate Ursula von der Leyen on her election by the European Parliament Tuesday. It is indeed historic. We now have the first president-elect, a woman, for the European Commission. And I look very much forward to working with Ursula, and I find a lot of inspiration in her guidance and what line she's setting for the next Commission. I'm here, though, today to talk about a decision that we have taken. So today, the Commission has decided to fine Qualcomm 242 million euros for an anti-competitive behavior that is illegal under EU antitrust rules. Our case concerns baseband chipsets. They are the chipsets that are compliant with 3G standards and mainly used in mobile broadband devices. Our investigation found that Qualcomm blocked competition by applying predatory prices to protect its dominance. EU competition rules do not prevent dominant companies like Qualcomm from offering low prices to their customers. But dominant companies, they have a special responsibility not to impair competition in the internal market. They can sell at low prices, but they cannot sell below cost with the intention of eliminating a competitor. This is not competition on the merits. While such predatory pricing can lead to low prices in the short term, customers are worse off in the long run. Because once the victim of the predatory strategy is marginalized or leave the markets, well, then a dominant company is no longer challenged by competition and will try to recoup what it has lost by raising prices and slowing down investment and innovation to the detriment of consumers. You probably right now have a baseband chipset in your pocket or in your bag. They are in all smartphones, they are in all tablets that we use every day. Thanks to this vital component, mobile devices can connect to mobile networks so that we can make phone calls or we can access the internet. Baseband chipsets, they can also be part of external modules, such as data cards, which are plugged into devices, which can then connect to the internet. These mobile broadband devices were among the first to offer high-speed mobile connectivity, allowing laptops and other devices to connect. Between 2009 and 2011, 3G was the most advanced wireless technology standard. At the time, Qualcomm sold 60% of these chipsets worldwide. There are significant barriers to entry into this market. Chipsets are very complex as products. They require high investment in research and innovation. The fact that Qualcomm dominated the market is, as such, not a problem under EU competition rules. We value companies for becoming successful due to their skills, due to their innovation. The problem is when a company distorts competition against the interests of consumers and the market as a whole. Our case began with a complaint from a company called Icera. Icera was a small, growing startup which introduced its first baseband chipset to the market in 2006. Icera's chipsets became an attractive alternative to Qualcomm's baseband chipsets, in particular those for data cards. As a result, Qualcomm started seeing Icera as posing a real threat to its chipset business. Our investigation showed that Qualcomm identified the threat as critical by 2010. Qualcomm not only had a concern about the growing success of Icera's chipsets for data cards, it was also concerned that Icera would start offering 3G chipsets for smartphones. Icera's success in the data card segment could serve as a springboard to allow it to compete in the far more significant and profitable segment for chipsets for smartphones. To make sure that Icera's business could not reach a size that could endanger the market position of Qualcomm, Qualcomm took what it describes in internal documents preventive actions. This meant offering very targeted price concessions to two strategically important customers, namely Huawei and ZTE. These were big customers of chipsets for data cards, and they were essential for Icera to succeed in the market. Our investigation found that 2 crucial years for Icera's development prospects, Qualcomm offered 3 of its leading or chipping-edge chipsets at prices below cost to their key customers. The prices set by Qualcomm did not allow it to cover its cost for developing and producing chipsets. The evidence that we have seen shows that this was done on purpose. It was done on purpose to prevent Icera from gaining a foothold in the market at a time where Icera was Qualcomm's main contender in the market segment for chipsets for data cards. As a result of Qualcomm's conduct, Icera was prevented from gaining reputation and scale as a supplier of chipsets for data cards and, ultimately, for entering the larger smartphone segment. Icera did not make it as a self-standing competitor in the chipset industry. In 2011, it was bought by NVIDIA, which decided to abandon the baseband chipset market a few years later. Qualcomm's abusive behavior also had a negative impact on innovation. By choking off Icera's revenues from the 3G business, Qualcomm deprived Icera of funds that it needed to develop chipsets for the next wireless generation, the 4G standard. Qualcomm did not demonstrate that its conduct created efficiencies that could justify it. In short, Qualcomm's behavior deprived customers of a wider choice of technologies and affected Icera's ability to develop chipsets for the next wireless technology generation. And this is why we fined Qualcomm 242 million euros. The fine reflects the seriousness and the duration of the infringement. Now, predatory pricing is not a common type of case. In fact, the last time the Commission imposed a fine for such behavior was 16 years ago. But no matter how difficult, no matter how complex these cases are, we remain committed to fighting predatory pricing by dominant companies. Moreover, the decision today will support any action for damages caused by Qualcomm's anti-competitive behavior before national courts. In fact, in cases before national courts, a Commission decision is a binding proof of the behavior that it took place and that it was illegal. But it is true if you think that it took some time for us to conclude this case. We opened the formal investigation and sent a statement of objection to Qualcomm back in 2015. Since then, we sent a supplementary statement of objection to Qualcomm. We held 2 oral hearings. We engaged in detailed exchanges with the company concerning additional information that was required for our investigation. Qualcomm has also appealed one of our information requests to the General Court, and after losing in the first instance, appealed the decision to the European Court of Justice. These many different procedural steps, they are a key part of the checks and balances that ensure the procedural fairness of our enforcement system. But they do take time. We have made progress in this mandate in expediting our antitrust procedures, but it is a challenge that will stay with us for quite some time still. Just to conclude, this is the second antitrust fine that we have imposed on Qualcomm. In 2018, we fined the company 997 million euros because it granted exclusivity payments. In both that case and today's case, Qualcomm's objective was the same: to protect its dominant position in relation to baseband chipsets, to shut out its rivals. Similarly, the Commission objective in these cases is always the same: to protect European consumers, to enable choice, the benefits of competition that are so obvious: choice, affordable prices, and innovation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We can now turn to your questions, starting with today's decision, and then we can broaden up a little bit. Let me also point out that we have quite a number of experts in the room, and we will start with Nicholas back there.
Hi, Commissioner. Nicholas Hurst from MLEX. So you said that you discovered evidence that this strategy was intentional and they were aware or they were aiming to eliminate Icera. Did you uncover any evidence that would suggest that Qualcomm knew it was breaching EU rules but went ahead regardless? Did it knowingly break the EU competition rules? And it's a second question about just about the duration. You said it highly complex predatory pricing, many different steps in terms of protecting the rights of defence. Nonetheless, has this case spurred any thinking about steps that could be taken in the future to ensure that cases don't run for 10 years, regardless of all those factors? Thank you.
One of the reasons why I think every procedural step has become an issue is, of course, that when you want to do a price cost test, you need a lot of information from a company. And I would think, if I was the company, that this is quite an intrusive investigation, because you need a lot of numbers to do what is called an AXO test. So obviously, sort of our procedural steps and the substance of the case have been intertwined. This is what is called, I think, the second AXO test, because we found in the internal documents proof of the intention of the predatory pricing. As far as I know, we didn't find any proof that they know that it was illegal due to European competition law. And obviously, as you will see, that we're dealing with a US company versus a UK company and two Asian companies, Huawei and ZTE. When you see the harm done for computers was, of course, the devices sold in Europe, but indirectly via Huawei and ZTE. So it is quite complex, also for the businesses involved, to see in what jurisdiction a harm would be pursued and investigated. And I think that is part of the explanation as to why it has taken so long. When I look at sort of the statistics of our casework, I think we have made quite some improvement. If you look at the Google AdSense case and the Google Android case, they were, in terms of antitrust cases, relatively fast. If you look at the settlement on the ebooks case with Amazon, that was done within 2 years' time. So in a number of cases, you can see that we speed up, never ever because we compromise on a fair process, but because we try to, for instance, from the very first document is put on the file, to make sure that we have thought through how to allow access to file in an expedient manner. In this case, I think like 40,000 documents on file. So obviously it's very important that these documents, they are put in a in the file in an orderly manner, so that you have access to them if you receive a statement of objection from us. But that is part of the explanation as to why we can be more expedite in some other cases, because of all these sort of time-saving procedures internally, finding a week there, 2 weeks there, a month there, in order to do things in a more expedite way. I don't think that we will ever get over sort of the sort of inbuilt dilemma here, which is that we have a very strong incentive for speeding up cases, but those that we investigate, well, very often will have the opposite incentive, which is to withdraw, not to withdraw, but to prolong the investigation, contrary to merger control, where both us and the companies have the same time incentive to get the investigation done and to get it over with.
Thank you. Then I see Aoife.
From Aoife White from Bloomberg. A related question. You recently took interim measures against Broadcom in a similar market, chip market, which is in danger of tipping. Do you see, how quickly do you think those cases need to move? I mean, we've seen some of the national cases go within a couple of months. What's your target for bringing a final decision, an interim decision on Broadcom?
Well, we hope to be able to do that early autumn. It is, again, of course, tricky because obviously it is also a case to do interim measures. If we would want to order you to do interim measures, we would send you a statement of objection. We will, of course, protect and enable your right to defend yourself before we can take a decision on interim measures. And again, we do this as fast as possible because, as you say, if there is a risk of a tipping market, we have to be there, but we will always respect the right to defend yourself. But hopefully, if we still find that we are right to impose interim measures, sometime early autumn.
Thank you. Then we had Kushita. Could I please remind you first ask your questions about today's case? Thank you.
Commissioner, hi. Kushita from PAR. Just going back to the Icera case, what were the particular challenges the case team faced in finding evidence in this case? I asked this question because the formal complaint was first launched 9 years ago in 2010. You yourself mentioned the last predatory pricing case was done 16 years ago. Was there any particular challenge stemming from the fact that this company went bust also? Thank you.
No, not really, because the evidence we needed was evidence coming from Qualcomm. Because it's with Qualcomm we need to show that the prices are set at a predatory level. And that is kind of tricky because, you know, our sort of natural instinct would to be happy about low prices. Because then if you're a customer in the value chain, at the end you can present affordable prices to your end consumer. But here, of course, when it comes to predatory pricing cases, we need a lot of data from a company, either to do the AXA 1 test or the AXA 2 test to show that you price below average variable cost or average total cost. And in the two different circumstances, well, it is quite complicated to make sure that you get it right, depending, of course, what test you will make, if you would then have to attribute also part of the cost of a company to these specific products. Because a company like Qualcomm, they do more than baseband chipsets. And this is why it is a challenge to do this, because obviously you can have a back and forth about what kind of information can you request, what kind of information it is proportional for you to request, in order for us to have the comfort that we have done what we can to prove this case. And this is what makes predatory pricing cases so challenging for us. But I hope that we can show by doing this case, even though Icera is not on the market anymore, that it will work as a deterrent, that we stay vigilant when we see traces of predatory pricing, and companies should think twice, or maybe they should not think about doing predatory pricing because obviously we have the willingness to investigate it, even though it is very challenging.
Follow up directly? Yeah, go ahead.
Quick follow-on on the fine level, since you also mentioned deterrence. I noticed the press release says that it's set at 1.27% of Qualcomm's turnover in 2018. I'm just curious as to why it was 1.27% when the conduct is as serious as pushing a company out of business. In the Intel abuse of dominance case, it was set at 4.15%. So is 242 million deterrent enough? Also, I wanted to note that NVIDIA purchased this company for $352 million in 2011. So I think from the complainant side, a question is, this is not a fine that's enough.
Well, the first thing is that what we can show is a case of predatory pricing, but we cannot show definitely that this was what pushed Icera to be bought by another company and pushed them eventually out of the baseband chipset market. That we cannot show. What we can show is that predatory pricing took place. And the fine reflects that this is a relatively short duration of the infringement. Of course, you see that it's a serious infringement, which is, of course, why there is some sense of gravity, even though it was short. Another side of this case, I think, is important when looking at the fine range, is the fact that here there is a possibility for private damages. Because as said, our decision today will work as proof in national courts to say, well, this conduct took place and it was illegal. Then it's for the complainant in a national court case to say, well, we were the victims of this illegal conduct. And that, I think, is part of it, because not only do you get a fine, but you also get proof against you that you have done something illegal, and that proof can work with others if they want to take you to a court in a member state.
Next I'd seen, yes, back there.
Thibault Linger, Politico. I had two questions. The first one, did Icera ask for interim measures back in the days? The second question is, when you ask for supplementary evidence, did you already have proof that there was an intent to drive the competitor out of the market?
On the first question, to my knowledge, no, there was no talk about interim measures back in the days. And second, from what I know from the investigation, well, you got sort of the two sets of evidence in a not sort of serial order, but coming in more or less together. So you see that, oh, something is wrong here. They had an intention to do something. You see the prices as such, but then you have to dig in to see the price level and to fully understand how does that price level compared to the cost of the company.
You didn't have evidence before the second round, like clear evidence that there was an intent of driving the competitor out?
Well, evidence in cases like this is evidence that comes from analyzing and calculating the price-cost relationship. So what you get from the company is a lot of numbers on how do they price things, how do they produce things, what is the cost of getting there. And for us, one of the things that were beneficial for us in this case was the fact that from the internal documents, we could see the intention. That there was an intention, it was on purpose, what Qualcomm was doing. And you see, we have these two different set of tests that we have from court practices, from the case law, and we could then use the second test because we both have proof of the intention, and we can see in the numbers that they price below cost.
My question referred to when you got, so as you said, in the documents you received, you found intention. So it's probably in the PowerPoint, someone said, oh, we need to kick them out of the market. The question is when you found this, because the Qualcomm says that the second, the supplementary request for information, you went fishing for information. You didn't have enough. So my question is, did before the supplementary request for information, you found in the documents proof of intent, which you cannot find in the data, or did you find proof of intent while you received the document from the second RFI?
I don't know the exact timing of that, but I know that the General Court have had the first ruling. They said, well, the Commission was fine. The ask of the Commission, first we asked the information in a letter. We didn't get the information. Then we took a decision to request the information. That decision was then appealed. The court upheld our request for information, so the court, at least in first instance, found that our ask was proportional and that it was to be requested. That, of course, is now being appealed. This is why it's important for me to say that the court in first instance. But so far, we feel that we have been doing this exactly by the book and with no fishing expedition, because part of that, of course, is that we are proportional in what we ask to be able to do our casework.
Thank you. We can turn to other questions. Simon, I think? No, sorry, yes.
Sorry, I'm to assume that we can move on to more general questions now, or are we still on?
Questions
Sure.
specifically on the case? No, that doesn't seem to be the case. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. Michael Acton from MLEX. First, quite an easy question with a simple yes or no answer. Is it your desire to stay on as Competition Commissioner under the next Commission? And secondly, somewhat linked to the first, what discussions have you had with the President-elect so far? And in particular, has she given you any assurances that you'll be placed on an equal footing with Frans Timmermans as the two highest-ranking vice presidents in the next Commission?
Well, you know, I'm a middle-aged woman. I've been working with journalists for like 30 years of my life. And one thing that makes me watchful is this is a very simple question. When you start like that, you know, be on your guard. I said, I think now 6 months ago, that if there was anything I would like to do, it was to continue as Commissioner for Competition. I usually try to put a lid on it, but I'm very happy with my job because I hope it makes sense for people and for the many, many businesses who compete on the merits, that they see that here in the European Union, we do our best to make sure that competition is fair. So it's a great job. Now, of course, things are to some degree changed. My own home country, and I'm very, very grateful for that, has renominated me as a commissioner. In the agreement in Council, it was said that Frans Timmermans and myself were to be highest ranking. And what Ursula von der Leyen has provided is indeed an equal footing on the substance so that we can work together for the Commission programme to be put into reality with the rest of the college when finally we have a new Commission.
Thank you. Then we had, behind Michael.
Hi, I'm Natalie McNeilis from MLEX, and I have a question about Facebook. I understand that the Commission has sent out questionnaires about Facebook, and I was wondering, what is the concern that you're investigating?
Well, it is indeed correct that we take an interest. What investigative steps we have taken so far, I cannot comment.
Good. Short answer. Any other questions? Yes, one back there. And James. Okay.
Hi, this is Rafaela Shadrati from Austrian TV and Radio. I have a question concerning Galileo. We heard that the system was restored, and however, the Commission is trying to establish an inquiry board to kind of investigate the roots of the problems. But however, the Commission, I'm not sure if it's right now, if it's that we can ask other questions as well, or just like competition cases. I'm not sure.
This is for, I think, for the midday briefing, yes, because I'm as interested as you, but I really don't know the answer.
Okay, maybe we can.
We'll come back to the question in a few minutes when we start the midday briefing.
So the Commission said it wants to establish an inquiry board to get to the roots of the cause of the problems.
What we mean is that we can come to this question during the midday briefing, which will start right after this press conference.
So, okay, that was the question, yeah.
I will go to my office and watch it so that I get the answer as well.
I think I saw James, yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. Martin Selmayr is stepping down next week, according to some reports. Given that he's in charge of no-deal Brexit planning, does that mean that the EU is less prepared for a no-deal Brexit than it was before his resignation?
How did you come up with that question?
James is good at surprising us.
Well, no, I think no matter who's on the teams, we are prepared also for a no-deal Brexit, and we have been that for quite some time, and that preparation, of course, stays as relevant as it was when it was first made.
Okay, you'll know we have a midday shortly. Do we have any final questions for Commissioner Kushida?
Sorry, I just have to ask this. Can you give us the latest update on the shopping remedy as well as the Android remedy? How many compliance reports have been submitted by KPMG and Mavens, and what do the recent traffic and click data look like? Thank you.
I don't keep count of the reports being submitted to us. The numbers move, but only very, very slightly. So the level is basically the same. In 75% of queries, you'd find a rival. 40% of clicks would one way or another go to a rival or a merchant hosted by a rival. We will indeed keep monitoring this. Same as goes with the Android remedy, where the timing, of course, is in the hands of Google. But we, of course, stay vigilant because this is a very important market for us. But there is no sort of further news than that.
Ok, merci. Ensuite, je vois Nicolas. C'est pour la...
I see Nicolas. Is that for the Commissioner? I know that it's exceptional for me to give up defense subjects. I'm from Sud-Ouest and B2. I'd like to say something about two Western European countries who want to reform competition rules. They've been wanting to do that for a long time. You talked about the priorities of the upcoming Commission. How do you view this situation, this desire to change competition, and how would you explain it? Well, it's very important.
And I take a very strong interest in how do we not only use the competition rules we have already, but how do we make sure that they are relevant in a digital age? There are a number of suggestions in the report from the special advisors, from the input that we have got from the market, from the contributions in our conference in January, that I think is very important to see, well, what can we do to make sure that we don't allow a market to tip? And that may happen sooner in a digital economy than in a non-digital economy. You see economies of scale being a completely different creature when things go digital. We have data as a barrier to entry, as an essential resource for innovation, for making your algorithms relevant. So there are a number of more regulatory issues that we'll have to come back to. Because as far as I see it right now, of course, the individual cases, we need to do those, and we will continue to do those. But we cannot just have the casework to pave the way for a fair, competitive market when everything's go digital. So there is indeed a need for a push in that direction. Second, when we discuss industrial policy, one of the things that are obvious is that there's at least three things that any relevant industrial policy will have to fulfill. First, it has to be relevant for all of industry, because the European industry comes from the very big companies to the quite small companies, but all playing a role in that very fabric of the European business structure. Second, that it is climate change, kosher, because everything will have to be looked through that prism, Because if you don't, well, then we will have no chance of meeting the targets that we have set ourselves. And thirdly, of course, an industrial policy will have to have its basis in wanting to have fair competitive markets. Because otherwise there is a risk that we place the cost of having an industrial policy, in places in the value chain where we don't really want that cost to be placed, or with the final consumers. So in that respect, I think for the next coming months, it is very important that we keep discussing what do we need in order to make sure that Europeans and European businesses can have the benefit of a fair competitive market in Europe. And that I welcome anyone who wants to participate in that debate.
I think this has triggered more appetite. So, Thibault?
Excuse me, everyone is hungry probably. Two questions from the two conversations we just had. You have just mentioned the three things that industrial policy should be about. Should we understand that there are discussions that industrial policy will be part of your portfolio in the next Commission? The second question is about competition rules reform. In President von der Leyen's speech before the Parliament, there were no mention at all about competition. There were some mention about competitiveness, but not competition rule reform. Does it mean that it will not be a priority for the next Commission?
Well, since no one has got their portfolios yet, or their sort of mission letter yet, I think we're all free to express interest of almost everything. And I think this we're talking about now, it is, I love this expression. It dovetails with competition law enforcement as such. So in that respect, no, I think it is just very important that we see things also more holistically. And second, I think, I don't know, but I think that the speaking time of the president nominee was limited in Parliament. Now she's the president-elect and will, of course, detail the program for the next 5 years. I'm absolutely certain that how to make competition law enforcement relevant in a digital era will be part of that working program. I don't think one should at all exclude that or include that on the basis of that, in my opinion, very inspiring speech in the European Parliament Tuesday.
Okay, do we have any new questions? Kushita?
Commissioner, would you be desirous of having competition law as one of your key portfolios as VP?
Is that new questions?
Well, it's very difficult to answer that kind of questions. As you know, in this mandate, I've had one piece of legislation to empower national competition authorities to be able to do more, to get the digital evidence, to get the necessary independence, resources. I don't think that legislation within the competition portfolio in itself fully can sort of fill up your working day. In the competition portfolio in itself, there will be very interesting debates, not only when it comes to sort of the regulations, but also to the state aid guidelines. You probably know that we have launched a fitness check to see if our rules are fit for purpose. And that result will come back in the next mandate in order to see, well, what should we do to make sure that state aid rules is an enabler of fair competition and not something that is felt as a time-consuming, detail-mongering exercise, but something that enables fair competition within the single market. So there will be a lot of sort of regulatory guideline work to do in the next mandate, but how we will organize that, that remains to be seen.
Thank you. Yes, over there behind the camera.
Thank you. Joe Barnes from the Daily Express. So to comment on some of your colleague Frans Timmermans' words, he said that the Commission should start treating Britain more harshly. So with Britain's new Prime Minister being elected next week, how do you think they should be treated by the Commission? And do you share his thoughts that Theresa May's Brexit negotiation team were running around like idiots? Thank you.
Well, just to put it very straightforward, as long as the UK is a member of the European Union, I think it should be treated as a member of the European Union. And when the UK is not a member of the European Union, I hope that we will establish a new close relationship.
Any comment on your colleague's words?
No, none whatsoever.
I think we had the last question from David back there.
Thank you. David Price, Euro Democracy. I have a question about the competition and choice of commissioners. Originally, the term independent, which is one of the main conditions for choice of commissioners, meant that they weren't allied to any government interests, political party, or other organization. And there have been a number of candidates who are not up this time, who are not members of political parties. Political parties, when the community started, represented 15% of the population as membership, and now is only sort of 2% of the population who are members of political parties. And I'm wondering whether the political parties are showing an unfair dominance of the choice of commissioners, and that there isn't a real good choice of commissioners and proper competition in the 500 million people who could be open to put themselves forward as candidates, provided they have the age and experience.
I really appreciate the efforts of putting the question into a sort of a competition portfolio. It's a very interesting question because the European democracy is unique in its nature. It's also unique in this nature that we have the sources of legitimacy from our member states in council and from our directly elected representatives in parliament. And then we have the commission. And I take that independence very seriously. It made a big impression for me when we took the bus, all new commissioners to Luxembourg, and in front of 37 judges in their robes, literally had the hand on the treaty to swear not to take instructions, not to seek instructions, but to do what was in the treaty. Because the treaty is a promise that every member state have signed up to, big or small, or whenever we became a member. And that, of course, is the balance. You may come and be named by a government. It may rely on your party affiliation. But look at my own country. It's now a social democratic government, and they called me to continue as commissioner, being from the Social Liberal Party. So it's not, always one-to-one, the governing party sending someone from the governing party. But I think the expectation on each and every one of us, when we hopefully are confirmed by the Parliament to serve in the Commission, that we serve in a collegial way, that every member state, no matter their government, will have equal treatment by the Commission. I know that is a complicated, unique way of having a democracy. I very much like it, because I think it's very much a reflection of European history and European geography.
Thank you. I'm afraid with this we will have to conclude the press conference, and midday will start shortly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.